Three, two, one, here we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian the Rainman Lucas. Welcome to Rainman's Take, observations on the world we live in. We're going to take a deeper dive into topics of interest to me, including politics, current events, history, popular culture, and social issues. You'll find the diversity of topics refreshing. In our clickbait, soundbite society, we rarely get the whole story. Rainman's Take interviews interesting people as well as peeling back the onion on specific topics, all with the goal of getting people to think more deeply about a subject. My guest today is Mike Oristian. Mike recently campaigned and ran in the primary for California's 53rd congressional district on March 3rd, a spot currently held by Susan Davis. Mike is originally an Army brat and kind of grew up between California and New York. He graduated from Stanford University and has had a career as a software programmer, both as a technology consultant and a startup entrepreneur. Mike currently lives in San Diego and enjoys all the things that us San Diegans do with the weather that we have over here. So, Mike, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas.
Hey, before we get into the conversation of the day today, I just want to kind of give a quick kind of how this is going to play out. So Rainman's Take, the reason why I originally wanted to do Rainman's Take was not only to interview interesting people, which you are going to be, and your story about running in that primary I find fascinating. So not only are we going to have a very interesting conversation, but Rainman's Take is also my take on current events of the day, politics of the day. And because you've recently kind of been in the fray of politics, I'm sure we're going to have discussions about various things that are going on in the country right now. So with that being said, really looking forward to today's interview. And why don't we go ahead and start off, Mike, just kind of give us a little bit of a background about yourself, and then also why and how you got involved with that primary race.
Sure. Yeah. I had zero interest in politics, right? When I was growing up, I was always kind of a math and science guy. I liked biology, chemistry, physics, things where there was a right answer. Whereas it felt like political science, you could argue either which way. But I was astounded that the last 20 years has brought us a 20% bump in the appetite for socialism. And I think that's very disconcerting. I always tell people you can vote your way into it, but you got to shoot your way out of it. So I said, hey, I might as well throw my hand in the ring. I think there's a need for people to be able to articulate free market capitalism. And I think people, especially people who have, environmental background like myself, startup background, maybe even entertainment background, people, I think those kind of industries don't frequently spawn somebody who's a more conservative thinker. So I thought I would be able to be somewhat articulate on the issues, and I did my best.
Interesting. So, and actually, we definitely want to talk about that down the road. So you decided, hey, very frustrated, I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot. What's that process like to get set up a campaign, to get going? I mean, what does that entail?
You mean getting on the ballot?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I chose to run at pretty much the last possible time. I think the deadline was something like December 3rd this year. I went in on a Monday to the registrar of voters. You have to get 60 signatures of actually registered voters in your congressional district. So that's no small feat, right? You got you get 60. They give you 60 spots, and you gotta land with 40 legit currently registered voters at those addresses. So I did that, and it took me all week. That final week from Monday to Friday, I was hustling around from Friday, Starbucks, and finding those folks. You got to pay a filing fee, right? You got to pay a $1,700 filing fee. The filing fee is kind of related to how many people are in the district. So yeah, it was kind of an exciting little trip to jump into. So that's the process. and obviously, that meant for me, it was a pretty truncated kind of 3-month campaign, which, in terms of focusing your energy, you're going the whole time. So.
Yeah. And so you probably, I would imagine, probably relied heavily on the whole social media thing. I mean, that's a lot of people talk about Trump's campaign and kind of how he utilizes the social media to his advantage. Obviously, it sounds like you probably didn't really have a big machine behind you, so you're doing it all on your own. So yeah,
that's right. My campaign was focused on content marketing and mostly Facebook. When you don't have, for these primaries, you don't have the party endorsing. If there's multiple people in the party, at least San Diego Republicans, made a choice to not make any sort of support or endorsement of
for anybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which, we could talk about, the pros and cons of that. Obviously, the Democrats during the primary did endorse Georgia Gomez. But, my goal was to use my own content. I was just going to, shoot videos that I thought were interesting, I thought were relevant. Yeah, either 30-second videos, 2-minute videos that I could turn into Facebook ads. And or kind of long form like I did with a homeless guy here in Balboa Park. So the strategy was, if I can take content that gets seen organically and pay for Facebook ads, see what the numbers come up. And we did okay. We got close to 15,000 votes. So it was a good.
I mean, not bad for somebody who's I assume zero political experience, right? This is your first time ever doing anything like this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did the Leadership Institute's Campaign Academy in the spring, around this time last year. A lot of their content's kind of focused on, somewhat similar probably as it was since the 70s, where it's kind of talking door to door, talking yard signs, talking budgeting. I think the digital landscape has definitely changed politics in that way, but in some ways for the better, right? Because it gives access to people. You can get in people's social media feeds for a fraction of what it takes to get on TV.
Right. And the people that you were running against, one of them in particular, Jacobs, I mean, obviously you have to assume that she had a huge chest of money to play with and probably a big machine behind her to help her through her campaign.
I think she had raised I think her campaign had raised $700K even before I entered the race.
Really?
Yeah. And she also, and she also had a super PAC that was doing kind of other activities. So she raised a lot of money. So Sarah Jacobs came in first, Georgette Gomez came in second, Janessa Goldbeck, even before I had entered the race in December, I think had raised $100,000. So yeah, you're talking, people want to get money out of politics, but I don't know exactly how you extricate the two.
Yeah. So it one of the things I find fascinating, I mean, obviously when you watch the big national campaigns, I mean, the amount of money that's being thrown around is just insane. And so even in the primary, that's what I find fascinating. Even in the primary, that money gets big, and that money probably has some big influence.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, everyone talks about overturning Citizens United, but it's the challenge of not letting institutions weigh in. I mean, if Citizens United were to be overturned, it would also change the landscape for unions, right, and union contributions. Yeah. So kind of the sword kind of cuts both ways. And, even if I were to have a fundraiser, right, where somebody hosts a fundraiser and we have, 10 likely donors coming over to that person's house, you got to mark that offering of the host as an in-kind donation. So if you were to get money out of politics, anything that anybody did for you still would have to have a value quantified to it. And so you really almost can't really divorce the two.
Yeah. That's unfortunate, because that seems to be a lot of the problems that we're seeing right now is because of the money and the influence that it has. But like you said, how do you fix that, right? I mean, how do you change that without? I mean, I don't know. That's the one thing I think that is kind of based on your experience going through this campaign season. Are there things that you would like to see to make it a little bit more of a balanced playing field, or does there need to be any changes made in your mind?
Well, I mean, balanced playing field. I mean, I think everybody, I had a challenging, well, before you even get to the money part, right? It's very hard to fundraise if it looks like you can't win, right? And the district knows, okay, ultimately, you're going to come to the fall with two candidates. It's either going to be a Democrat and a Republican, or two Democrats, because this district the 53rd is what they call D+16, right? So that means a typical voting, blind voting, people voting along party lines, you're going to see 66% of the people vote for the Democrat and 33% because it swings that far off center. Whereas, Scott Peters' seat is a D+4, D+6, and they say that's the Cook's partisan voter index, right? The PVI, Cook's PVI for every district, and I think it's even, state assembly districts as well. You take that pool of people and voter registration and you show how it skews. So coming into a D+16 district, people are looking at you going like, hey, well, am I giving you this money just so you can get, be number two? And I think the shenanigans, when you talk about what needs to be changed, what happens during a primary, which is a jungle primary. There were, between 12 and 15 candidates running for this. And so there's kind of some game theory around, well, what do you do to get so that your party's in the top two? It makes it challenging. It means you have a lot of inter-party rivalry, right? Because people are going, all right, well, if we can split the other side's vote in certain ways, then we have a greater outcome for our side. Yeah. So you see a lot of that stuff happening, and you saw it up and down Cal. I mean, Cal Matters did a really interesting article a couple times, basically saying you've got a lot of people who are split party in a district that might be winnable. They'll go and run as the other party just to eat away at the vote for people who aren't doing their real research. Like, hey, this guy switched to being a Republican. So now that they're wheedling out, now there's multiple Republicans. Now it's going to mean that there's two Democrats on the ballot in the fall. So
that's behind the scenes coordination, right? That is happening. They're doing that.
Oh, it could be. I mean, people just take a cursory look at the news, so they don't really know. When you're looking at a bunch of names on the ballot, and if you're voting, in terms of R and D, once you split the vote up enough in these primaries, you're going to have all kinds of results like that. Yeah. Nobody's going to stop somebody from switching party affiliation and doing something like that. Yeah.
And I tell you, having lived out here for 25 years, the super majority right now in California, obviously, is a super blue state, and it's just when there's no competition of ideas. I mean, you see what happens. I mean, California over the last 30 years has done almost a complete reversal from what it was like. And on your website, and if anybody's interested in learning a little bit more about Mike and the platforms that he ran on, his website is www.mo4ca.com. You can get some detail about what Mike's all about. But I mean, on your website,
or Oristian for Congress,
Oristian for Congress. Okay, cool. And on that, on your website, you have a pretty cool statement, which I think speaks a lot about kind of your view of things. And that was, 20 years ago, California led the country in unique ideas and entrepreneurship and all those sorts of things. And it seems like it's changed a lot since then.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that we produced Reagan and Nixon and a whole host of other, kind of conservative thinkers. But still here, 35% of the state voted for Trump, right? So, I mean, the exercise needs to be, look, there are ideas out here. We cannot just summarily dismiss conservatism in California, right? I mean, that's like in that statement, that spirit of that entrepreneurial spirit is I think something special to our state, and something that's driven a lot of the industries that have created us being the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world, right?
Yeah. It'll be very interesting to see how things go with California. Now, you are not, so you obviously were a registered Republican, but I would probably more categorize you more as a libertarian, kind of like me. We're freedom-minded, bigger individual, smaller government type of stuff. But people, all they would see is just an R behind or beside your name. Wouldn't really, and if they don't dive any deeper, they wouldn't realize that you actually have some pretty middle. I wouldn't say Democrat or progressive ideas, but you've got some very serious thoughts about legalizing marijuana, about how to deal with the homeless problem. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, about kind of your personal philosophy on, or your personal politics, if you could.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the key issues, if you were to poll, during the obviously since the election, these could all be topsy-turvy, but polling during the time of the campaign would show that housing affordability and homelessness were the two biggest issues facing these districts around San Diego, right? So we spoke to that kind of coming from a standpoint of, libertarian values, balancing liberty with safety, for residents. I think in the middle of our campaign, they did the count of how many homeless folks were in San Diego County, and they registered they counted close to 8,000 of them. They're all in 5-star hotels now. Well, apparently they are up in LA. But a lot of the focus on that was just kind of, it was less bringing a solution than it was saying, look, we're spending more money on homelessness programs every year, but it's not yielding any sort of efficacy in terms of results. That spending, if you're saying that spending, the budget is going up 16% year over year, how is it somehow getting caught up in the bureaucracy of the kind of homeless initiatives or nonprofits or NGOs or whatever it is? How is it not actually manifesting in terms of more people off the streets? And one of the key tenets I had during the campaign was, homelessness in San Diego, as we've seen it, as I talked to county health officials and whatnot, everybody else in the campaign, Democrats and Republicans alike, would try to frame the homelessness issue as one of, housing affordability, as if those were two of the same issues. And I said they're separate issues. The homelessness issue was more of a substance abuse issue, and housing affordability was more of this kind of, not in my backyard fight with growth initiatives, right? And some of these developer initiatives that were around, do we allow for smart, dense growth around transit centers, or are we just going to be a bundle of red tape that never gets anything, and it never gets any more housing supply up in California? So exploring that stuff. I mean, but the kind of one-liner I used through the whole thing was housing affordability and homelessness, both big issues, but do not conflate the two.
Interesting. Yeah, it's obviously people have been watching the news, understand that California's got a serious homeless problem. I mean, what's going on up in LA and up in San Francisco, it's just a nightmare. And like you said, it where's all that money going? What all the focus and all the energy goes to this, supposedly goes there, but nothing happens. I mean, what would, in your mind, and let's just use let's just use San Francisco as an example. I mean, what kind of based on what you were thinking about in terms of your stance on how to tackle the homelessness issue, what do you think could work?
Well, it's Scott Sherman who ran for mayor, but didn't ultimately prevail. He slipped to number 3 in the subsequent counts beyond election night. So by the time they certified the vote this past April 2nd, it doesn't look like he's going to be on the ballot for mayor in the fall. He talked a lot about how as a city council person he would get thanked for them kind of ripping apart the encampments, some of the encampments, actually enforcing vagrancy laws.
Yeah.
And he was recounting times where he was approached by previously homeless individuals who had substance abuse problems, who said, hey, the best thing that ever happened was that, sometimes you have to hear, no, you can't do this. The libertarian mindset in some ways says, hey, look the other way, let people do what they want to do. I'm not going to, get in their business. But it's also not compassionate to let somebody, live in their own feces and can, to be stuck, struggling, doing something. So we were kind of talking a lot about compassionate coercion. My interview with Mike, the homeless guy, which is, a long interview, but a number of people made all the way through. He's a guy that I'd known for a few years, and he would talk about his safety not being, he felt safer sleeping in Balboa Park than he did in some of the, St. Vincent de Paul or
really?
Some of the various facilities. And so, it's sort of like, I think I asked him if he had seen Carlito's Way, that notion of, the notion of somebody getting stuck in a downward vicious cycle and just not being able to break out. Yeah. And so, I think it was more of a, hey, let's have some conversations. Throwing money at the problem is actually not the thing. I think the decriminalization of meth use, there are 3 assembly bills that kind of came together to pretty much tie the hands of cops that were looking at giving, writing citations for people who were obviously doing meth use. Prop 47, 47, 57, and I think you find eventually that the cops don't want to kind of be stuck in the middle of something where they're writing a ticket and saying, hey, this guy's got to show up for a court date, and the guy never shows up, and you just you repeat. I think Trump has done some really good things with criminal justice reform, but definitely on the ground here in California, I don't think you're seeing some of the best decisions get made.
Yeah, well, and that my take is I completely agree with you. And if you look at San Francisco, it's almost like they're just letting them do whatever they want. Doesn't seem like there's any boundaries up there, and it's gotten to the point where it's just, you read these stories about people not wanting to have their conventions there. So it's going to start hitting the pocketbook at some point. And the fact that they're just, it's almost like they're just turning the other way, hoping it goes away on its own. And that just probably makes it worse. Like you were saying, the compassionate coercion, Yeah, it's that one's a tough one, man.
I call it the Brazilification of California. In Brazil, you have the very, very, very rich and the very, very, very poor. You don't really have a middle class like we've traditionally had in this country. So you end up with citizens getting stuck in the middle and kind of going, look, I'm going to go elsewhere. Sure, you have a cheap labor supply, and then you have a whole bunch of people who are on the dole. And it just doesn't pan out ultimately well for the average citizen. It doesn't become a place where there can be upward mobility out of substance abuse scenarios, homelessness scenarios, you name it, unemployment scenarios. So got to keep the middle class. It's a critical part of our society.
Yeah, and that kind of goes towards what you were talking about earlier as well about the whole, the whole issue of affordable housing. I mean, we're dealing with that up where I live in Encinitas. They I find it fascinating that the places where and I've been to a couple of these town hall meetings where they're talking about it, and the location that seems obvious is not even being talked about, and then they're trying to, well, thankfully the citizens of Encinitas are really trying to stop this, but then instead of having it where you think it would be perfect, they go and propose like a 5-story condo tower out in rural residential zoning, so it's those two issues that you talk about, the money and the people in control really don't seem like they even want to try to solve the problem, and that's a shame. And that's why I found it so fascinating when I learned that you were running, is because my personal opinion is the system is so ingrained in itself that it needs to have those outsiders come in and, move the needle somehow. So what did you think? What's your take on, and so I'm going to, my sort of view of what you did was that whole idea of Mr. Smith goes to Washington, just a normal citizen who wanted to try to solve something, be part of the solution. What's your feeling on like term limits and things like that? I mean, based on sort of just the periphery that you kind of watch the whole process, you see a lot of that. Where do you see the whole idea of term limits and things like that, so that maybe we can somehow get more people like you who are not career politicians into the mix and into the conversation? What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of term limits. I mean, I think what you have to balance is if everybody's a freshman, congressperson or senator or what have you, then there's a certain amount of experience that comes with the job that makes you better at doing that job, better at forming alliances and whatnot. So you have to allow multiple terms for sure. But I do think that the founding fathers did design it so that there shouldn't be the idea of a career politician. It should be, you go and you have a business, you're active in a business somehow, or you have a career as a dentist or a carpenter or any number of trades or professional kind of white collar career. Then go do it for a while and then get out of it and let somebody else kind of run with your same ideas. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, they have jumped down Trump's throat and claiming that he's the problem. But if you look at a sum total of representation in DC, I mean, definitely on a federal level, and you say, wow, these folks have been there each for 30 to 50 years, and somehow the last 3 to 4 years have been the problem.
That's interesting that you say that, because I'll never forget. Like you, I'm libertarian. However, I voted for Trump. If you had to label me, it would be a conservative. I'm just more for limited government, bigger individual accountability, all those sorts of things. And it just seems like I can't relate really to anything that's on sort of progressive left side of the aisle right now. So, the Republican side isn't the panacea either. There's problems everywhere. And one of the things that really caught my attention when Trump first got elected, he had that interaction with Mitch McConnell, and basically McConnell's like, whoa, it's not how we do things here. And it was like he was getting in the way of Trump trying to make something happen. And it just showed me just how, when there is that ingrained in the system, that you really can't get anything done.
Problems are endemic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think when you look at Trump, I mean, look, they say the line is that the left has gone further left, and it has, and then the right has gone further right. But I would argue that Trump, Trump has kind of taken over the Republican Party, and there are two key policy choices, and they're the top of his policies that were traditionally, JFK Democrat kind of issues, right? Yeah. Trade and immigration, right? So when you have a nation on the vector towards globalism, and when all these middle class and lower income jobs, manufacturing jobs and the like, are shipped overseas, and you have unfettered immigration, where you have a limitless labor supply, some of them willing to work for less than minimum wage because they don't have tax ID documents. They're undocumented workers. Yeah. When you have those two things conspiring, you're letting that middle class erode. And the Republicans for years had never done anything on order of looking at really fixing illegal immigration, because they knew that ultimately really cheap labor, even shadow labor, is good for business, right? Yeah. And on a trade level, they knew that global economies that allow for maximum outsourcing allow for maximum profiting, and it means that ultimately the EBITDA of these companies can do better and better, and we have high performing companies. Trump took traditionally democratic ideas, or I'd say 60s, from the 1960s kind of democratic ideas on protecting the laborer, on protecting the worker, and he took those ideas and brought them to the right. And that's why the guy that's supposed to be voting for Biden, that middle class, hey, Pennsylvania coal town kind of guy, that the Joe the plumber from campaigns past, that's why that guy is never voting for Biden again. That guy's voting for Trump. And that was the fundamental shift that we saw in 2016. And Trump was smart about it and focused on those states to get those purple states that had a disenfranchised, lower to middle income, lower to middle class worker. So,
yeah. Where do you see? Let's bring it kind of back down to California and our local situation here. What do you see? How do you see it? This all kind of playing out over the next 5-10 years. I mean, do you? I personally don't, but do you see?
I don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 weeks.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, we are living in some crazy times right now. But do you ever see there being any type of a parity between the two parties in California, or are we just so far to the left that that's almost an impossibility?
Well, it'll be interesting, right? Because nobody's. There's pollsters, right? But right now, you have a lot of people who really are not super tuned in to the political exercise. They're not following beat by beat breaking news. Say pre-March, they weren't following beat by beat political news. When they get told that they can't go to the beach, when these things that are happening in the context of the coronavirus are happening, and they're starting to realize that there are government actors that are, in the name of public health and safety, are seriously infringing upon rights, kind of not in an end run around the Constitution, but in a, in trying to create the immediacy necessary to protect people. I think more people will be tuned in to this. So I think I think maybe for that reason, some of the feelings on the response of, the coronavirus response team has divided a little bit along political lines, because I think that people are looking at this and saying, all right, so what Benjamin Franklin said, those who would trade security for liberty deserve neither, right? Or those who would trade their liberty for security deserve neither. And I think in that way, you start to get to say, well, it's like, okay, well, if if we can't open back up till there's no chance one life will die, we'll never be open. You know, there are risks out in the world, and we always are dealing with risk tolerance. So it's obtuse to have something that extreme in your vernacular. Oh, until we're sure that everybody's going to be safe, we can't open up. So I think people are waking up. So what happens in the next 5 years? Who knows? I mean, California has always led the way for the rest of the nation. So if we are, if the pendulum gets stuck all the way on the left here, then it's going to get stuck in all the purple states, right? States like Texas and Virginia and Idaho that are basically taking the exports of California liberalism are themselves going to go purple and then go blue. If we don't enact voter ID laws, that are going to stay that way.
It's frustrating being on the outside, kind of watching, because you don't really understand just the machinations of how that all works.
Well, a question I ask a lot of people in recent weeks has been, and it's an interesting question, I think, because I say, if there were mandatory vaccines for this virus, would you trade, and they were somehow RFID traceable to the human?
Yeah.
Would you trade mandatory vaccine and accept one if it ensured that mechanism of identification was used as voter ID? One person, one vote, no finding 6,000 ballots, dumpster. And I can argue that either way. I can argue the answer to that question either way. My instinct is I don't want a vaccine. I haven't had a vaccine since measles, mumps, rubella, and I'm fundamentally distrusting of big pharma and big government. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but aside from polio and measles and other elements of children's public health, I think people should be able to make their own healthcare decisions.
Yeah.
When it's healthcare.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd like to see how that would go over that question on the national level. How many people would be like, yes, but now you actually have an accurate number of everybody that's supposed to be voting. So that'd be very interesting.
That's right.
Yeah. So was this a one-time thing, or do you think you're going to try it again in the future, running?
I think, there were a lot of lessons learned in this campaign. For one, like I said, it's really hard to raise money if it doesn't look like a winnable seat.
Yeah.
I would want to know at least that I would have some sort of party support going forward, that there would be, not a machine, but, I wouldn't have kind of same party folks stepping on toes and whatnot. I would either need to see I would run for a seat if I could see a clear pathway to victory, or, and a clear, obviously objective on getting there. And then, or if I thought that my viewpoint that I was, going to be comfortable articulating was something that needed to be included in the conversation. So possibly impossible to win, but I needed to have, there needed to be this voice, this raise. So that's, I think that would be a requirement for me before I did it again. I do believe it's been often said that, politics is downstream from culture. And so, if you really want to make a political change, you can make, if you want to change hearts and minds, which will end changing the political spectrum, you could do that in a cultural way.
Yeah.
And so I think that, I have probably a greater interest in these kinds of conversations, and we have a slew of new content creators with some of the stay-at-home policies, and I think this is going to be really good. You doing Rainman's Take, I think, is a great part of the conversation. I want to kind of inject, instead of this kind of breaking news where we're always receiving this, oh, here's the latest, and what's my side saying, and what's their side saying. I like more long form formats where it's not 5 to 7 minutes of talking heads on your news channel, but and kind of like, hey, well, how, what has been the history of politics in Hollywood, and how has it gotten these ways, kind of looking at these more long overarching things and kind of showing where the entrenchment has happened, looking for opportunities for political mutations. I think political mutations are the only way to really get people unstuck from this divisiveness. So
explain that a little bit. Political mutations. What are you referring to there? Well,
whenever you have someone who kind of goes against, whatever their type is, it's like identity politics. That's why my campaign slogan was, ideas, not ideas over identity. It's like, oh, you're a gay black man, but you're a huge Trump supporter. You're a great, you're some of the people we want to have out there to show that, the endless tirade of the people on the right are racist. Well, this guy supports Trump's. Clearly, he wouldn't support a racist president.
Right.
So let's have that kind of conversation. Yeah. Or the politics of Israel. Right. I think you have a really interesting thing that you have a large population of the U.S. That's Jewish in heritage, is kind of secular in their world outlook and votes for Democrats.
Yeah.
But Trump is focused on Israel and the heritage of Israel. So you do have moments where you'll have somebody who's Jewish kind of cross their kind of typical aisle. They went to Ivy League school, but they embrace their Jewish heritage, and they see that Trump is working with Netanyahu and really a strong ally to Israel, and those kinds of opportunities where someone plays against. Unfortunately, we have divided so hard in our corners. Whenever there's a crossover and there's a political mutation like that, I always see a great opportunity because it's how we get unstuck.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's a great way to look at things. And it's almost, and again, this is coming from a guy obviously who doesn't know anything about the inner workings of politics of DC, but you always hear the stories of freshman congressmen that go to Washington, and when they start talking about how much time they spend working on fundraising and trying to get reelected and not even doing the work of the people, it blows me away how much time is spent doing that. And so it's almost as if you could, a guy like you with your ideas that could bring a lot of people from both sides of the aisle together. As I read these, a guy like you is probably more effective outside of that environment, because that environment's so ingrained, and that's where
I had heard something. There's a retired Navy guy in LA that's running against Maxine Waters.
Really?
Joe Collins. Yeah, check him out. He needs our support. I had heard a stat, something where like he had raised $1.1 million. I don't remember what it was, but it was on the order of, say, he raised $1 million. I'm like, man, how did he do that? I raised $7,000. How did he do that in the same amount of time? And it was like, well, he held a fundraiser. Well, how much did the fundraiser cost? $800,000. So it's like, you got to spend money to make money, sort of thing. And you get in a situation where, man, you find it crazy when you look at the number of people who were, bidding for the Democratic presidential seat, and you realize that all these people currently have jobs as our representatives now.
Yeah.
You see them on the campaign trail, nonstop running around. You're going, well, how how much do they actually do when they're in Washington? Then
Yeah.
That's how this goes. So yeah, I'm with you. And that aspect of constantly campaigning, and you're halfway through a 4-year term, and you're campaigning for the next election. I think it's really challenging. And just the favorites of the incumbency. It's like, you get some name recognition, whether you're doing a good job or a bad job, you get name recognition. I mean, like, it's like people are highlighting that the states that have done the worst with this COVID-19, the absolute worst, the population of Florida versus the population of New York. I mean, they're both right around 20 million people. And yet New York has lost an order of magnitude more people. Okay, you could say New York's more dense. But what is it that DeSantis did that Cuomo didn't do, right? And then the other thing is, because these people are front and center in crisis zones, maybe doing a poor job, whether it's Gavin Newsom or Andrew Cuomo, then because they're in the spotlight so much trying to solve these problems, now their TV quotient goes up, and guess what? Their bad ideas are not going to send them on to the next election, higher role. So it's like they say there's no such thing as bad press. Infamy is as powerful as fame. We're living in crazy times, man.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I want to try to instill with Rainman's Take is the idea of you can't just get your information from one source, or it can't just be sound bites and the quick commercials. You have to go deeper than that. You have to look at both sides and truly be able to put together an idea about whatever it is, whatever the issue is. And until we do that, we're at the liberty of people being able to control the narrative, as opposed to being a well-rounded, well-read individual. Okay, I know both sides of this argument. This is how I feel about it. And I'm really not going to let that 30-second soundbite influence me on it, because I know that what they're saying isn't necessarily true. Or I know that they're trying to influence me one way or the other, but I know both sides. And excuse me, it's I wish you had met this guy. My late father-in-law was amazing. He was a lifelong liberal Democrat, but he literally knew more about my side of the argument than I did. And he was so even-tempered, and he was so well-read and well-spoken that he would just tie me into intellectual knots whenever I tried to talk to him. And I'm trying to do that myself, read as much as I can about issues so that I can formulate a solid thought process about whatever it is that the issue of the day is. And so I tell people that if you're only listening to one side of the story, or one news agency or program, whatever side it is, you're either only getting half the story, or you're not getting any of the story. So that's
I think one of the main problems that what my number one issue that I was running on, the issue of housing affordability and homelessness, those were more issues that were directly affecting the voters of the 53rd congressional district.
Yeah.
Where I came into it was kind of as a tech entrepreneur who saw the rise of these big tech companies and the power. Most people are now getting their news kind of from social media through someone else's opinion on a particular article. And so I saw the mechanics of censorship and algorithmic bias that have kind of been in play, really since Google went public, since Gmail, so it's from 2004, say for the last 16 years. That I saw as we really need to dig into that, because if we're treating these social media platforms as public utilities, I mean, granted, the libertarian in me says, hey, you're big tech, You can do whatever the hell you want with your platform. But when these platforms have bought up any competitors and now are kind of the de facto ways in which we communicate and news is disseminated, I mean, you know, they worry about the $80,000 that the GRU spent on Gmail ads. Are you kidding me? It takes a very light touch on one side of the scale up there in Mountain View to change search results, to change, you know, newsfeed algorithms that determines what you see. And if those are not offered to American citizens in an equitable way, sure, who cares that we have free speech in the public square? You have a megaphone with batteries in it, and you pulled the batteries out of my megaphone.
Right.
And I'm going, wow, how am I going to get my, you know, if what I'm saying knows to be true? So the marketplace for ideas has to remain such.
Yeah, interesting. That's a whole nother. We could probably do a whole episode on that.
Critical.
Yeah. Wow. So talk to me a little bit about you. Your formal education at Stanford was environmental sciences. Is that correct?
Yeah. I was the first graduating class from a new program called Earth Systems, and I was focused on environmental technology within that. I was, you know, this is 25 years ago.
Yeah.
But you know, I wanted to be pre-med and I wanted to be an engineer, so I kind of took, you know, it was, my coursework was pretty much civil engineering. Okay. With, you know, when you do civil engineering wet side, you're, you know, prepping for everything from, you know, wastewater treatment to solar, renewables, energy, you know, petroleum engineering, climate science. So a lot of focus was on climate science. Okay. Stephen Schneider, the father of global warming, he was one of the deans at the Earth Sciences School there. So he was kind of the, you know, advisor to my program. So yeah. I had a, you know, very kind of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, you know, save the world with market ideas. I was really focused on market-based environmentalism, where you could go in and find ways to make the environmentally friendly option the cheaper option, you know, businesses and residences. So I was super fired up on it, but I you know, I graduated in the mid '90s when IT consulting was the boon and the green tech boom really hadn't taken off. So, you know, it got me into tech, and you know, I pretty much have stayed in tech because it's, you know, an incredible time to be able to build enterprises.
What is your take on that, the technologies, and like you're talking about the green technology? What's your take on how that's going so far?
Well, I mean, there's an incentive. You know, energies, you know, are big cost, right? So anytime we can have an energy revolution, that's good, right? I mean, I, you know, it really comes down to whether or not you view the world as letting the market, you know, bottom up, find new ways, or whether it's going to be a command and control kind of top-down approach. You know, the Green New Deal has been a command and control kind of like, all right, we're going to reduce, you know, we're going to reduce, you know, the Green New Deal reads like, okay, we're going to reduce pollution by the year 2030 like this. We're going to get to these results, but there's no how. And I think I'm all for all these environmental technologies. The key area that we need to work on right now is storage, right? Like you drive through the desert out to Arizona or whatever. I mean, you got miles and miles and miles of sun, and you see some solar farms out there. And solar is good because in those areas, right, they have, the load is well matched to the demand, right? In the afternoon when the sun is blazing, you're able to use that electricity to run air conditioners and whatnot. But ultimately, to be able to have a shippable, I always say a good BTU, British thermal unit as a energy unit of measurement. Having a good BTU to weight ratio is critical. people say, I want to have, electric cars and electric planes. There ain't no plane that's going to run on batteries. The batteries required to fly a plane would be 200,000 times the weight of the plane, right? So you gotta think smart. You're not replacing jet fuel anytime in the near future. So, but I think there's tons of promise, and look at everything that Elon Musk has done with Powerwall. I think there's great promise, but like I said, because there's money to be made in it, we have to let the market drive those things. We can't just say, hey, get rid of your gasoline powered automobile.
Yeah. And what I always tell people is, if somebody wants to be that radical, like, we need all electric vehicles in the year 2030. I always tell them, I say, the United States is 350, 380 million people, whatever the number is. There are 15 cities in China that equal that. And then there's another 2 billion people left that are still going around on mopeds and, little buses that spit out a bunch of fossil exhaust. They're not gonna go for that. So we could completely go off the grid and go, and we're not gonna have an impact we're not gonna move the needle hardly at all. And it's fascinating the politics of that too.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's people start to see that, you don't have to be. You can embrace climate science and look at the changes, but a wholesale dismissal of capitalism in the name of saving the planet sure looks a lot more like a march to progressive socialism than a real change, and it's why people would call out actors like Greta Thunberg for not going to China and India and Pakistan and saying, look, these guys on a per capita basis are the big polluters. We signed the Paris Climate Accord. We still have 10 years before those guys do anything in their reduction. Meantime, in the meantime, we've totally hamstrung our economy, and we've gotten to a place where, nobody can do anything because we don't have the energy for it.
Yeah.
So
crazy. All right. Well, listen, Mike, this has been great, man. And I definitely want to have you on again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Because I feel like you and I could talk about this stuff for hours. So let's do this. Why don't we go ahead and start winding this episode down? But I'll give you the last word. Why don't you kind of give me your kind of final thoughts on what are some of the things you think that we can be doing to kind of help move the discussion forward and move the process of maybe getting the parties that are so ingrained in their corners kind of back moving towards the middle. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, you're doing it. I mean, this is it. This kind of forum, whether it's debate or kind of confirmation and drawing analogies. I mean, this is the work, is really diving into. I think the way forward is definitely to get people more in line with a kind of a proactive way of thinking about the way they think, instead of a reactive way of fitting what happens to a narrative that they're ostensibly kind of bit into. And so you're doing it. I think that's what it takes, is that kind of this kind of forum where it's a friendly forum. You're not just chasing around my fact, your fact, this site, that site, but kind of a friendly way of hey, let's look at it from this angle, or let's take a walk over on this side and look at it from this angle. So you're doing the work, and I hope you. I think it's great. Rainman's Take is great.
Well, and I appreciate that, and I totally agree with you. I think I love the times I have the most fun is like at a dinner party or something where you're sitting next to somebody, maybe you just met them, so it's a very friendly environment, and they may feel completely different than you, but you actually have a conversation, and it is possible to have a civil conversation, civil disagreements, and I think that's at least what I see on TV right now. That seems to be missing from our general discourse. So, well, I tell you what, Mike, we definitely got to get you back on at some point. I'm sure.
All right, man.
Sure, as events unfold, we'll have a lot more to talk about in future episodes. But thank you very much for hanging out with me today.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
All right, man. Hey, real quick before we close it out, as a former Marine Corps officer, I just want to say this: if you are in the military, police, fire department, or first responders, if that's you out there, thank you very much for your service. Stay safe, and until next time, this is the Rain Man. Take care. Thanks for watching Rainman's Take, Observations on the World We Live in. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rainman's Take on Instagram at Rainman's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.